After the First World War, regimes from Germany to Italy to Russia sprouted up in hopes to create a more stable nation-state. After the relative quiet of the 1920s, the 1930s prompted drastic political change within Europe. The discontent that had been harboring in Spain finally reached a breaking point, resulting in the Spanish Civil War, which provided Europe a dress rehearsal to the Second World War to follow.
Prior to the 20th century, Spain consisted of a ruling monarchy and a powerful oligarchy system comprised of wealthy landowners. In 1868, the monarchy was briefly overthrown and replaced by the short-lived First Spanish Republic. Once the monarchy was restored in 1874, Carlist and anarchist opposition to the monarchy had emerged.
During World War I, Spain remained neutral, and its economy boomed due to weapon and ammunition sales. Much like the belligerent nations, however, massive inflation affected a large proportion of the post-World War I Spanish society. The working, industrial, and military classes made attempts to unify and remove the corrupt central government, but were unsuccessful, which put the wealthy and impoverished at odds.
After having a military dictatorship for most of the 1920s, Spain in the 1930s was characterized by deep political divisions. The Second Spanish Republic came to power in 1931. Relations between the Republican government and Catholic Church became strained, leading to the emergence of radical movements and calls for revolution, which soon seemed inevitable.
And so the revolution began. The military coup began at 5:01 p.m. on July 17, 1936, with the Army of Africa, Spain's toughest military force, sweeping up from Morocco through the south of Spain to Madrid. While making their way north, the nationalist force systematically slaughtered civilian men, women, and children.
The fighting was divided between the Republicans and the Nationalists. The Republicans' support base was primarily secular and urban, including some landless peasants. Republicans ranged from centrists, who supported a moderately capitalist liberal democracy, to revolutionary anarchists who had hopes for autonomy.
The Nationalists, on the other hand, also known as the rebels and fascists, led by General Francisco Franco, had a primarily anti-communist ideology. Nationalist leaders generally had a wealthier conservative monarchist landowning background and supported the Catholic Church. This group was divided among the Carlist, Alphonsist monarchists, Spanish nationalists, and the fascist Falange. The Non-Intervention Agreement of August 1936, arranged by the French and British government, included the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, Italy, and 19 other nations. The agreement outlined a plan to monitor the materials going in and out of Spain, subjecting it to international isolationism. Germany and Italy covertly provided support to the nationalists, while the USSR supported the Republican faction.
Although they signed the Non-Intervention Agreement, both Germany and Italy supported the Nationalists by sending air, armored units, and artillery to assist in the fighting. Italy actively sought a Spanish alliance in order to make their goal of conquering the Mediterranean easier, while the Germans wanted to test out military techniques.
Despite the non-intervention agreement, the USSR and Mexico were two of the largest Republican weapon and ammunition suppliers. The Soviets saw the Republic as an opportunity for communism, while Mexico provided sanctuary for Spanish refugees. Furthermore, troops from Britain to Yugoslavia volunteered to form international troop brigades.
Great Britain acted as the main voice for non-intervention in Spain. England sent formal protests to Italy when the Italians began openly supplying the Nationalists with assistance. Although the British publicly proclaimed themselves neutral, they were strongly anti-communist and thus favored a nationalist victory.
When war broke out, Secretary of State Cordell Hull followed American neutrality laws and restricted the selling of goods to both sides. American business, however, heavily favored the nationalist cause. On January 6, 1937, the U.S. Congress passed a resolution banning the export of arms to Spain. FDR made true of his promise that the U.S. would not become entangled in European affairs.
In 1936, the Nationalists carried out the first major airlift in history in order to build a fighting force. Thousands of troops were lifted out of Spanish Morocco and taken to join rebel leader General Franco, aka El Generalismo, on his march from the south. Franco quickly moved north until he was sought at the Spanish capital of Madrid.
The year 1937 saw the only publicized Republican victory of the war at the Battle of Guadalajara and the savage bombing of Guernica on April 26, which killed 200 to 300 civilians. Despite this, nationalist troops took Madrid and won the Spanish north, pushing the Republican government from Valencia to Barcelona.
By May 1938, the Republican government made attempts for a peace agreement with the Nationalists. The Nationalists refused and called for unconditional surrender. Their efforts paid off. By May 1939, all of Spain had been conquered. On April 1st, the Republican troops officially surrendered. Following the surrenders, nationalists began carrying out reprisal attacks. The Spanish Civil War saw the implementation of new war techniques. For the first time, strategic bombing of civilian centers were carried out. During the bombing of Guernica alone, over 200 civilians were killed. These bombings created shock among the public and were made famous in paintings by Pablo Picasso.
The expansion of war propaganda produced technological leaps in modern photography. Journalists from across the world ventured to the Spanish conflict in order to document civilian experience. Techniques like photomontage were widely used to wreak havoc on the enemy's psyche. Likewise, artists like Picasso focused their pieces on the horrors of war.
The Spanish Civil War served as a testing ground for new military weaponry and techniques. New methods produced heavy artillery, planes, and armored-plated vehicles. After encouragement from German commanders, elements of what became known as blitzkrieg were implemented. Even emergency medical techniques, such as triage and blood transfusions, saw improvement.
The Spanish Civil War showcased fascist regimes and the effects of fascism on European countries. Both Hitler and Mussolini were heavily invested in Franco. El Caudillo was the supreme ruler of Spain, who could openly execute any political opponent. During his rule, Franco revitalized Spanish culture, such as bullfighting and flamenco music, citing a call to Spanish nationalism.
Following the war, General Franco's regime executed thousands of Republican sympathizers after carrying out military trials. Those executed included the various Republican constituencies who were unable to leave. Those who weren't executed were sent to Franco's penal universe that included reformatories, prisons, and concentration camps.
The Spanish Civil War provided a dress rehearsal to the Second World War. Not only was the war ideologically fueled, but countries like the Soviet Union and Germany were given the chance to test out their military technology. The war gave European powers the chance to better develop military tactics and strategy, thus allowing a glimpse into how brutal the fighting would be in years to come.